Awesome. So, for those of you who don't know you and your story, can you give a little bit more background on how you became disabled?
Yeah, so I acquired my disability in 2004. I was in my early 40s. I was in a car on my way to get dinner with my fiance, and we were ambushed, and both of us shot in a random, still unsolved random attack. So I was shot in the back and paralyzed from the middle of my chest down. And my then fiance was shot 3 times. He was shot, his worst injury was that he was shot in the head. So he is blind and has a significant brain injury.
Now, when you became disabled, what was that transition like from being your average everyday person to now becoming involved in this world of disability? I know for me, it was definitely a transition period, so I could just imagine
Right, right.
what that was like.
And you too had a sudden transition into disability. It wasn't a gradual thing, as I recall your story.
Yep.
Um, so for me, I went from being an able-bodied athlete, physically active. If I could climb it or jump off it or swim under it, I was in, right? Um, so I was a very active mom. My son was 12 at the time of my injury. I think one of the most immediate concrete examples was, I had to leave my 2-story home where I'd been raising my child. Um, so suddenly I found myself homeless, bankrupt because of medical bills. This was before the Affordable Care Act, and without prospects for employment, as well as the long road to healing to learn what it's like to live inside this new body.
Now, just sort of to dovetail off that, you've now gone back to work. You're in the world of politics. Now, for you, what's a normal day like for you as far as like accommodations and accessibility is concerned?
Well, you know, almost every aspect of my life requires some level of accommodation. At this point, when I wake up, the first thing I see is my wheelchair, right? My wheelchair on one side of the bed, my shower chair that allows me to get up and get ready in the morning on the other side of the bed. Um, but it's a routine. That routine is built into my day, what it means to get out of bed and get ready every day. I have a very small, modest home that I have worked hard to modify to accommodate my needs, from little things like home automation for lights and thermostat and locks, and a wheelchair accessible kitchen, and laundry. And then the vehicle I drive is heavily modified so that I can drive. Um, and then once I'm out and in the world, the accommodations that I need are minimal. Curb cuts, automatic door openers are wonderful. Um, but other than that, and the space to maneuver my wheelchair. And that's what I think I want folks to know, is that employers especially worry, about the cost of modifications to introduce someone with a disability into the workplace. And we have found most modifications, there are numerous studies that say most modifications in the workplace cost less than $500. Now, the Arizona House of Representatives took an opportunity upon their awareness that, I had challenges moving through the building, but I could do it. They've gone and made significant renovations to serve the public overall and to update the building. But the only thing I actually needed was to have the pencil drawer in my desk removed, so that I could get under it. There were issues with wheelchair accessible toilets in the building, but there was one, and now there is one in every restroom.
Do you find it difficult to get accommodations changed and pushed through? Maybe not just for you as a person with disability, but disabled people as a whole? Like, are accommodations as readily available as you would hope them to be?
I remain surprised that, and as we're doing this interview, today is the 33rd anniversary of the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But as I move through the world to see how often there are violations, and what I think some folks don't understand, they see the Americans with Disabilities Act as somehow limiting their rights. And that it is it's an onerous building code. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights declaration. It says that people with disabilities are entitled to public access at the same rate as typically abled folks. And I'd like to see us continue to do the work to expand that universe to make sure that every body, no matter how it presents, has access to our public spaces.
When you see these other human rights movements and civil rights movements currently going on in today's environment, what do you think, or how can disabled rights and that movement become as prominent as these other more frame of mind or current mainstream human rights movements going on?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that. I think because access can be difficult or dangerous for some folks with disabilities, they aren't, they remain in the background. They remain in, their private setting, and they're not seen as publicly. So we're not considered because we don't show up. Because we don't show up, we're not considered. It's a vicious cycle. But I think that these other movements need to recognize the ableism within their own movement, because no matter what your movement is, 1/3 of the individuals that you hope to serve or to connect with are people with disabilities. Wherever you are, whether it's, you're working on women's rights, well, 1/3 of women are people with disabilities. If you're working on LGBTQ issues, 1/3 of the people that you want to serve are people with disabilities. If you want to work on education or housing or transportation or environment, 1/3 of the people that you want to serve who are going to be impacted by the work you're doing are people with disabilities. And rather, folks tend to stay in that very typically able mindset and try to cram issues for disabilities in at the very end. And it just doesn't work that way. When disability is baked in at the beginning of a project, whether it's an issue campaign or a building project, you end up with more elegant solutions in the long run.
Now, I know just from following your career, you've done a lot of advocacy work for people with disabilities. How has that been for you, advocating not just for yourself, but for other people in your situation?
Well, it's been a steep curve, and I think it gets easier the longer I do it. When I first started raising my voice to advocate for better public access, folks would make accommodations, but they thought they were making them for me, just for me. And so if an event was made accessible and I didn't attend, that was seen as being rude. But I'm like, well, why aren't you doing it so that everyone can attend, right? You're not making other you're not making sure there are men's and women's restrooms, and if only one gender shows up, you think, oh my gosh, we've wasted all our time, right? So that's the way that this work has gone for a number of years. And I've always been surprised the number of times that, especially in work that we've done to expand civil rights or social justice, the number of times that folks have put a price tag on accommodations for people with disabilities. We can't do that. It's too expensive. We can't have a sign language interpreter. We can't have accessible toilets. We can't put a ramp to the stage. We can't hire CART, which for folks that don't know, it's like closed captioning at public events. It projects closed captioning so that people with hearing disabilities can follow along with a program. But, civil rights don't come with a price tag, or they shouldn't come with a price tag, and that should be included here.
Where do you see the next big disability rights issue coming from, or what's like the next big focus that people with disabilities should put their energy and effort to getting changed?
Well, I think a lot of things go hand in hand. And certainly, as Arizonans in the middle of an unprecedented heat wave where people are dying as a result of it, we know as a community that a disproportionate number of these folks who are going to be adversely affected are going to be people with disabilities of one sort or another. Their medications make them more vulnerable to the heat. Their disability has left them in poverty or homelessness. So they've been impacted by the heat and on and on. So I think that's an important area to make sure we're looking at. But I think workforce development, housing, and public transportation, especially here in a city like Phoenix, go hand in hand. And, the disability community, you and I aside, Gabe, you and I are outliers in this community for being fully employed in jobs with, a decent income. Well, I'm a state legislator, so we can redefine what decent income is. But I wish that employers would recognize the inherent qualities that come with employing people with disabilities. Because the world isn't set up for us as it is for a typically able person, it forces us to become innovative problem solvers, tenacious. We have to develop incredible communication skills to help folks understand the nuances of our needs. And goodness, we have to become diplomatic, right? To manage caregivers, to manage situations, to deal with every time that we are denied access and try and advocate. And, I sat on a plane once beside like the hiring person for Amazon. And they were putting all of these things, they were explaining their hiring philosophy and that they look for people with these kind of soft skills first, because they can train them to be accountants or coders or forklift operators. And when we finished our conversation on the plane, it was a long ride. I think that he really started to see the benefit of hiring people with disabilities because of the set of soft skills that come with that from our life experience.
Now, we briefly touched on the anniversary of the ADA. Its big tenet is to fight discrimination against people with disabilities. One of the other things that I've experienced personally is this misconception about what it means to be disabled, that as soon as you have this disability, you're almost considered less than or not as important. Have you ever come across that, or what do you say to people who have this notion that being disabled is kind of like a life-ending thing that happens to somebody?
Well, disability happens on a continuum. Not everyone experiences disability the way you and I do, right? And especially folks who live with invisible disabilities, they tend to face more discrimination. People ask them to just get over it, suck it up, buttercup, without a real understanding of what it means. My disability is immediately obvious when you see me in person. By the way, for those not knowing, I'm a full-time wheelchair user. But I think that, within our disability movement, we have to recognize the many faces of disability And I think that we work to do that. But I also think that, typically able folks need to recognize that disability happens on this continuum, and that it's not an awful thing. We're not tragic or inspirational. We're just people out there doing the same thing everyone else does. And given a chance, we make good neighbors, good employees, occasionally good elected officials. But good parents, good partners all the way around.
That your answer kind of brought up something that I was thinking about previously. You mentioned inspiration. There's this whole subculture of inspiration porn, and
Right.
disability people are just there as
Yeah.
idols of inspiration for the able-bodied. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is there a balance where you can be inspirational at some point, but almost to an extent, it doesn't need to become your whole identity?
Well, so my friends know if you want to start an argument with me, call me inspirational, because I do take that as an easy way to blow me off, right? When I would go to the gym, to hear from folks, I thought I wouldn't be able to get out of bed today, but I knew you'd be here. And if you can do it, I can do it. And I'm like, and what? I'm just a cranky old lady trying to get my sweat on here. Please leave me alone. But it starts with things like the meme, or with this idea that, the only disability is a bad attitude. And no matter how long I sit and smile at a pair of steps or say, it's going to be better tomorrow, those steps aren't going to go away, nor am I going to get up them or down them by attitude. Disability is real, and our attitudes as general people are the limiting factor for folks with disabilities. So when people call me inspirational, rather than immediately get my blood up over that, I've now learned to ask questions like, how so? One person said, I met a person in public who recognized me once, and they said, oh my gosh, you're my inspiration. And I asked that question, and they had seen me do a marathon, and they recognized that they too could step by step set themselves up to do a marathon. And they were very proud of themselves for that. And so if I am your catalyst for making changes in your life, for making changes in public space, I think that's acceptable, because there are people that inspire me, and I want to be able to tell them that. But I don't think that I'm inspirational, or Gabe, I'm sorry to tell you, I don't think you're inspirational simply because you managed to get up and show up to work with matching socks.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I've had my own experiences where I'll be eating at a burger food restaurant, and a
Mm-hmm.
lady comes up to me and says, "Oh, it's so great to see you out and about. I can't believe you're out. It's so great to see you." I even had a therapist come out when I was in the hospital, and she was walking away, and she left the room. And right as she left, she's like, "It's so great that you have a job and contributing to society." And, and
Yeah.
it just it takes you back, and it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to fight that notion over and over and over again. And just having that urge to change these misconceptions almost seems like it's a never-ending battle. But yeah, we do it one day at a time. But
Yeah.
finally, since it is Disabled Pride Month, I just wanted to get your final thoughts on what it means to be disabled, and just how you take and view the month, and what it means to you.
Well, I do celebrate Disability Pride Month because I do think that individuals with disabilities are making great strides in a world that is inadvertently hostile to our existence through policies, through architecture. And over these past 33 years, and before that, but especially since the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, people with disabilities have been working to create a more inclusive society, a more inclusive environment. folks like you and I wouldn't have had the jobs that we have, before the Americans with Disabilities Act. As late as 1978, we could be arrested for being in public spaces for making people sad. The last of the ugly laws was struck down in 1978. Now, I remember 1978 very clearly. So it wasn't all that long ago. 1990 was not all that long ago when people with disabilities were declared to have human rights.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, just realizing that it wasn't that long ago where we were considered almost second-class citizens. And it's interesting to see just how far we've gone and how much yet we still have to go in the realm of disabled rights. But again, yeah, I thank you for chatting with me today. Hopefully, this was a good chat. I think I learned a lot, and I think other people will too by seeing our thoughts about Disability Pride Month. And I really appreciate taking a moment to chat with you today.
Well, it's good to talk to you, Gabe. And I've been following your career through these years. I think you graduated the same year as my son, didn't you?
I graduated ASU in '06, high
Oh, no,
school
or you're
'01.
slightly ahead of my son.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been following your career for a long while too, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you for being out there and getting it done, Gabe.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.